Welcome to the Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives from the lower Laguna Madre. Today's guest is one of the most talented people I have had the luxury of spending time with. He made his name as a painter, and his stories of catching tarpon on foot preceded him all throughout South Texas. A talented fly fisherman, gifted fly tyer, and an incredible artist. This is my conversation with Larry Haines. Before this begins, I want to make a quick disclaimer. During this episode, there will be some very subtle audio artifacts of Larry's dogs barking in the background. It has been edited out a lot, but it can still be heard throughout a few instances. Please adjust your volume accordingly. Mr. Larry Haines.
Yes.
I don't know where to start. I think you have done so many cool things, from all the tarpon stuff that you do, from all the art that you do. I guess my first real question here is, when did it all start for you?
I started fishing with my dad as a little boy down here. We fished the bay. Of course, we were using popping corks and shrimp, and that was back in the day where there was, I think it was 100 fish limit, and so he wanted fish like 12 inches. If they were bigger than that, he didn't want them. We'd throw them back. So that's where I first started saltwater fishing. And then, as you get a little older, you start going out with kind of on your own. And then you decided I'm going to fish with lures. I was tired of fishing with bait. I'm going to fish with lures. So, I did that for years. And then I got like, this is fun, but I want to make it more fun. So I started just using topwater lures. And then we used to go, my kin live up in Colorado and they live in Missouri. So we used to go up there in the summers and visit them. And I kind of learned to fly fish for rainbow trout one summer. And I thought that was a lot of fun. Took my fly rod back to South Texas. Those bluegill didn't have a clue. So it was really fun. But my fly, I didn't see it fitting into saltwater. So I was still spin fishing. And a good friend of mine called me up one time and he said, "Man, Larry, I just got back from Florida. I was out there fishing and we were using fly rods in the saltwater." He said, "Have you ever heard of that?" I said, "I've heard of it, but I've never done it." He says, "You want to go?" And I said, "Of course." So he started looking around to find guides that would take us, and most of them didn't want to get involved. He found a few. So we would go with them, and they would take us out. I said, "Well, we don't have a clue what to do." And we were like, "We don't either, but we'll put you on fish." So we started, filleting the water basically, because it's saltwater. You have to learn to cast in the wind and distance. And anyway, we got, it was fun, and I caught a fish or two, and I thought, this is big fun. And so I started just trying to do that all the time. And every time I went, I wanted to take my fly rod. Of course, I'd take my spinner rod. And those days that were good for fly fishing, which are not necessarily calm days. Yeah. You need some wind. Okay. You need wind. So anyway, we were catching more and more fish on them. And then I got to where I started tying flies, and Broadway Hardware bought a bunch of them from me. And there was another tackle store here in Harlingen, Ed's Tackle Store. They started buying them from me. So I was learning kind of how to tie saltwater flies. I was experimenting with them, trying them, which worked and what didn't work. And it just got to where that's all I wanted to do. And then I heard about catching a tarpon. This is a lot. That sounds like really big fun. Of course, my fly rod was a 7-weight or something, so that didn't work. I had to go get a 10, and actually I went for a 12, which was very smart because they're not any harder to cast and they will handle big fish. So we started going to the Port Mansfield jetties because I heard that's where they were. So we'd go out there in our boat and we'd we never even saw any. We'd fish and fish and fish. And then one day I saw one roll. I couldn't believe my eyes. They're really here. I saw that fish. So that made it even more more desirable. Like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. Well, I ran into a friend that he said, there's a bunch of them up at the Nicaragua, which is an old ship that sunk about 15 miles north of the Port Mansfield jetties. It's out in the surf. And the old boiler and stuff is still there. So there's like a big iron structure there. And we went up there and I caught a tarpon. I could not believe it. I just thought, well, that's it. I've always said the tarpon is a change your life fish. You catch one, all you want to do is catch another. So I started fishing for them a lot. But back then there was very few tarpon. Okay, this was in I would say the late 90s, and very few fish. And then I ran into a friend of mine, and he says, man, I'm thinking about opening a fly shop in Port Isabel. I says, that is a perfect idea. And he says, you want to go in with me on it? I said, well, of course. Let's do it, And so we opened up the shop there in Port Isabel. And I was in there painting, because that's what I do. I paint. Mm-hmm. But I was in there painting one day, and this guy walks in, and he was from San Antonio. And he introduced himself, and he says, I heard you caught a tarpon on a fly rod. And I said, wow, news gets out. I said, that was a long time ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And he says, you want to fish for tarpon with me? And I said, sure. What do you want to do? And he says, he had a little Suzuki Samurai. And he says, let's just drive the beach and go to Port Mansfield, fish for them off the jetties, look for them in the surf. And so we did that for several years, and we noticed more and more tarpon, more and more fish. First year, if we caught 1 or 2, we thought that was a great year. Then it got to where we were catching 3 or 4, 5 or 6. More fish. And then it got to where, they were just, I think we were kind of learning how to fish for them, watching the tides, watching the moons. And we got sharp about finding them. And so we were catching pretty good fish. We would catch them off Boca Chica jetty, the jetty here in Padre Island, and then the Port Mansfield jetties. And because he got seasick, so he didn't want to go out in a boat. I had a 17-foot whaler, but he didn't want to go out in that. So we were landlocked, which was big fun. I learned a lot. And so we always heard they were in the surf, but we never. But, you're driving to the jetties with blinders on, basically.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so we started slowing down and driving really slow and watching. And I couldn't believe it, man. A wave comes up and there's a tarpon in it. And I went, oh my God, they are in the surf. So we stopped and fished. Of course, they move. We didn't catch anything, but we started watching for them. And we started watching when they're in close to the beach and when they're not. They really like to come in after the tide is full and just before it starts falling out. That's when you're going to find them right on the shoreline. And they're going to fall out with the tide. So they're not there very long, but they're within feet of the beach. Literally, we would stop the Samurai. We'd see them and stop, and I'd have to jump out. We had our rods on the top of the Jeep so we could just grab them and cast. And you'd have to jump to the side of the Samurai so that you wouldn't hit it on your back cast. They were that close. You jump out and cast right across the sand.
No way.
And oh boy, that's when we started thinking, you know what? They're a lot easier to catch in the surf than they are off the jetties. So we really started watching for them, and we started noticing things that brought them in, the sandbars that they liked, and so we could do pretty good. Of course, the tarpon are increasing and increasing as we're fishing over the years. I think we fished for like 15 years together. Mm. And like the end of it, or we're still fishing together, don't get me wrong. But when it got to where he was too busy and I was busy, we couldn't get together. It wasn't unusual to go catch between 15 and 25 tarpon a day. So it was fun. Now, these are like 60, 70 pound fish.
Still awesome.
They're the best ones, in my opinion. Those big ones just kill you. I mean, I've caught 175 pounds. I've caught some that we're sure went over 200. But, we never boated them. We didn't get them out of the water, so you don't really know. But those things kill you. I had 3 of them almost put me in the hospital.
No way.
Yeah, 3 of them. I had one I fought for 5 hours and passed out, had a heat stroke or whatever it was, and passed out. But out there, it's hot. Mm-hmm. It's hot on those jetties, and it's
absolutely.
So that's what I did for years. And we just drive the beach and watch for them in the surf. We very rarely got to the jetties, which the jetties were actually filling up at that time. When we first started fishing the Mansfield jetties, there was nobody on it. We'd be there all day long, never see a soul. The last time I went up there, you could get near it. There's like 25 cars parked. Guys are lined up and they're not fishing. They're fishing for redfish because the redfish run the same time the tarpon do. So, but anyway, then we started going and catching them in a boat. I was going with another friend of mine that didn't get seasick. And that was a whole lot of fun. We'd go out the jetties and we would turn around and come right into the shore, right about the first or second sandbar, and watch for them. And that's where we would find them. And now one day we were catching tarpon out of this trench between the first and second bar, and guys were driving down the beach and they saw us. And they stopped, and they were catching them from the beach, and we were catching them and out of the same hole.
Really?
Yes, that was a hoot. But that's basically how I got into my tarpon fishing.
It's so cool. Last year, obviously, I reached out to you about the tarpon stuff, and I would spend all day out there, all day on the rocks.
Yep.
And if there was no tide movement, you wouldn't see jack shit. It was the most frustrating thing. I remember leading up until the first time I actually fished off the rocks, all I ever did was I would take my car out and I would just drive in lines until I saw one free jump. And I was like, okay, I'll get off here. And the first time I kind of conceded, I was like, you know what, maybe I'm just going to go onto the rocks. Not 10 minutes. I hooked one, jumped it. It was 50 pounds. Everyone was like, holy shit, they exist. Yeah. And I didn't catch another one for 2 weeks. Or I didn't hook another one. I don't think I landed a single one off the rocks. It was always whenever they were actually in the surf. But when they were in the surf, they just tended to be a lot smaller, at least the way I was doing it, which means that I was just doing it wrong. And I'm okay to admit that.
No, they run in schools. The fish in the school are pretty much going to be the same size. So if you find a school of big fish, they're pretty much going to be all big fish. You find with small fish, they're pretty much going to all be small. So you could go a day, one day, we found some tarpon about 10 miles north of the Access 6. And I think we caught 25 or 30 apiece, but they were about 40-pound fish. So awesome. I mean, it was like catching skipjack almost. They they were out there chasing those little anchovies, and it took us a while to figure it out. If you throw the fly in the anchovies, you're going to get a skipjack. And out there, the skipjack are big. I mean, they are big, and you can't get him in even with a 12 weight. Well, the tarpon are out of the way, so you got this skipjack online. You can't get him in, so it's frustrating.
Yeah,
but we found out if you fish the side of the schools, you're going to get more tarpon strikes than if you are trying to pull a fly through the school of fish. So we started, fishing the edges of those things and started catching a lot more fish. We also had to learn that, tarpon like to fly moving really slow. So you're stripping the fly and you're feeling these skipjacks just pound it, just bam, 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 bam. And you don't set the hook. You just and one of them will get on for a minute, but he'll get off, and so he'll carry the fly a couple of feet or whatever. But you just keep the fly steady, and you can tell when they hit the tarpon hit, it's a big weight. I mean, you just feel like you snagged the bottom.
That's the first time I hooked mine. The first time I hooked one on the jetties, I swore I got stuck on one of the rocks. I was like, yeah, there's no way. And then,
I
was like, oh my gosh.
They don't they're not like a snook that just yank the rod out of your hand. Everything just gets really heavy.
Yeah. And so I take it that, your hierarchy of fish, tarpon, I assume second is snook. How'd you get into snook fishing?
When we first opened the store, Eric Glass told us that, he said, there's a lot of snook up at the port, and I'll take you guys up there and show you how to catch them. And so he took us up there, and I caught my first snook on a fly. Probably the first. No, I caught one off of a fishing pier on the island one night. But that was the first one on a fly. And that was a hoot. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And it wasn't very big. It was probably like 20 inches. And it knocked the rod out of my hand when it hit. And so my partner and I, we fished the bay for so long. We thought, you know what? Let's just fish the port for a year and don't go in the bay. Let's just go to the port and learn it. And we went up there and started doing that. We were learning the tides, everything about it, where they seem to hang out and what time of day they do, or where, because they move. And so we started finding all these places to fish. And we go up there, we could catch them pretty easily. I mean, they weren't really huge, but that's because we didn't really know how to catch the bigger ones. Once we started figuring out that they're right off the edge, we'd throw up there and catch the little ones on the little flats, and didn't realize that the bigger ones are right off the edge, and they're down about 5 to 6 to 8 feet down there. So you have to use an intermediate line. And but anyway, once we figured that out, we started catching really big snook, and they're all 100% tide-oriented fish. If it isn't working, you're not going to catch one. I don't care what you do. So we did that for about a year and learned to port really well, and we caught lots of snook. We probably caught 100 fish a piece that year. And but anyway, so I love those fish. I mean, they're really acrobatic. They strike really hard. They're really a proud fish. When they strike, they almost kind of like they pause in the water and say, look at me, look what I did. And then we started finding them in South Bay, and we started realizing that there's a lot of them out in the bays in the summer. And we started finding them at the jetties. And so late in August, we were down at the river mouth one time fishing for tarpon. And I hooked this fish, and I'm thinking it's a tarpon. It jumped with its back towards me, and its gills flaring, and it's got the green back and the whole 9 yards. It comes up, and I went, that looks like a nice 4-foot tarpon, Well, it jumped again, and it had a stripe down its side. Like, I don't believe this. This is a snook. I think it was 42 inches.
Wow.
It was just like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
But they like the tarpon flies, so we were using. It wasn't surprising that I hooked one. It was just weird.
Yeah. My biggest snook last year was on the jetties, and it was my buddy Logan and I, and we were actually looking for tarpon. And I remember thinking again, I got snagged, and then all of a sudden it started moving and like bulldogging, and it wasn't that big. It was like 27 inches. I haven't done a lot of snook fishing.
A nice snook.
Well, yeah, but I wasn't able to do a lot of snook fishing last year because I didn't have a skiff last year, so I had sold it. But funny enough, that same day was the first day that I'd ever seen South Bay actually provide snook, and I mean that in regards to the previous times that we had done it. It was either puppy drum, sheep's head, and maybe some redfish, but it was never like you would see a snook like tip like under the mangroves like waiting. And that day I was on the back, and my buddy Logan was on the front, and we're pulling, I think down, must have been like one of like the little like cuts on the south side.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this big explosion, and this like torpedo like shoots out of this mangrove and like sits, and Logan hits him like right on the head perfectly. Fish takes off.
Mm-hmm.
Not 10 seconds later, breaks off. And I look at Logan, I was like, what happened? He was like, I was using 12 pound.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, why the fuck are you using 12 pound? We're here for snook.
Yes. Yeah, I used 30 pound shock on my flies. And I used probably a 13 pound tippet, something like that. You just need to keep it out of it's their gills that are going to cut the line. And then their mouth is like sandpaper. So every time they shake their head, it's sanding your line.
Yeah.
So the longer they're on, the bigger your chance of losing them. And if they're on light line, you're 9 times out of 10, you're going to lose it. There's just no way.
So I'm going to ask a question that may be controversial in regards to snook. Did you ever get to see snook inside of a rattlesnake?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not the only. So I've heard from a few people, Rick Hartman.
I've caught a lot of them in the arroyo and big ones. I caught a 36-inch one in the arroyo.
Really?
We were fishing for tarpon. That's what we used to do in the winter when the tarpon had migrated off. We found out that there's little tarpon in the arroyo and there's little tarpon in Port of Brownsville. And little tarpon, they're anyway from 25 inches to 3 feet.
Yeah.
That's what I'm calling a little tarpon. So we found them in the arroyo. And so we'd go up there in the wintertime, February, like we just got to catch a tarpon, So we tired of waiting for this tarpon to come back in. We'd go up there. We found them, and we could catch them pretty often. The arroyo is a lot harder to read. The tides don't fluctuate like they do at the port and places. So but we did do pretty good. And like I said, we caught the snook by accident because we're fishing for the little tarpon.
Mm-hmm.
And but we caught a lot of them, which was surprising. And so yeah, I've caught them all the way up almost to Port Mansfield. Well, I've caught some little ones off the jetties at Port Mansfield, but I've caught some off the intercoastal up around Peyton's, up in that area.
Really?
And on the intercoastal side, I haven't seen any in the bay of Peyton's Bay, but I've caught them on the intercoastal side of those spoil banks.
Yeah. The reason why I wanted to bring that up is that when you're talking about snook, I got reminded of like one of my favorite memories of seeing someone not catch fish. And it was when I first got my Maverick in like 2019. And my buddy had brought one of his friends who had never fly fished or had never like caught a redfish on fly. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. And so we take off in the morning. It's in the summer. And he's so insistent that we have to hit like this one island in Rattlesnake. I'm like, on the outside, so on the intracoastal side. And we start pulling it. Almost immediately, my friend gets his red on. So that means that his friend gets to fish and then I get to fish. So I'm like, I'm getting excited already. And first, like not even 5 minutes after my friend lands this fish, we see another redfish laid up. He throws like terrible hook set, blew it completely. And I'm like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing, whatever. We then proceed to see what at first I thought were a lot of big speckled trout under the mangroves. Mm-hmm. But then towards the end, I realized that I had quite literally watched my buddy's +1, if you will, blow probably like 12 shots at some serious snook that were just hanging out like big logs. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, like I'm probably never going to get to see that again. And I'm the guy on the back. Like,
no.
Yeah, no, that was insane. And there was another time, so my mom and my dad we're on the outside of Rattlesnake, and all of a sudden you start hearing some blow ups. And I turn around and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was looking at like a school of like 55 snook all up on the edge, and my parents can't see them. So at this point I'm asking myself, am I going insane? And I was like, no, hold on. So I grab one of the rods and I throw it over, and we're fishing like 12-pound fluoro. So I throw it over, I get one to eat, pops it off. I grab the other rod, throw it, reel, hook another one. And I'm like, I fight it for a little bit, just enough for like the snook to actually be seen as a snook. But my parents, they don't know what a snook looks like. So I see them like, look, it's a snook. And my mom said something like, no, it's like a speckled trout. And I was like, I don't think you understand the magnitude of what's happening right now.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's my few experiences seeing them up in that area. So you were tarpon, snook, you never wanted to try, or not never wanted, but you never found like an affinity for like big trout?
Oh yeah. I love catching them, but let me think, how would I put that? They're finicky.
You don't say.
And they're few and far between.
Especially now.
I've caught I think I've caught 29-inch trout. And I love to catch them. They're just not something I'm going to go after, because I would rather target a different species of fish. If I'm going to target a fish, I might just go out in the bay and fish, for reds or trout or flounder or whatever comes at my way. I love to catch skipjack. So if I see them come, I cast at them and catch them. So,
yeah.
When I'm out just having fun, that's just what I do. Whatever's there. When I target a fish, I'm really wanting to catch a snook or a tarpon, or so. Yeah, I like big trout, but I don't chase them that much.
Really, I've developed this like, I wouldn't call it an affinity, because I feel like I would need to catch more to call it an affinity. I guess like an addiction to the rejections. I don't know. But even last year, I hooked a couple really big ones, and it was always just silly mistakes. Granted, like I think last year I put like two 27s on fly, or like, and like, sure, 27s to like a spin fisherman doesn't sound okay, whatever. But for a fly rod to see that fish,
you're sight fishing.
It's
a whole different world,
completely different. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I remember, I think I noticed that when I started feeling the detachment from the fish, I started catching more. I don't know if it was like 3 years ago, when this was when I was filming my first movie, Madre Padres. I really wanted to get a big trout on film. And I'd filmed for like, I think it was like 37 days straight. And on the last day, Rick Hartman finally has a free day or whatever. And so I'm like, all right, let's do this. Like, we're going to get this big trout, because I had spent like 9 days in a row fishing all of South Cullen, all of Gatlin Island, like, and you would see them, but you would just see them.
Right.
Unless you had the south wind. And this was the first time we had a south wind. And, this thing that I've noticed when I've actually been able to hook these big trout, funniest thing is, every time I feel like I'm going to hook a big trout, it tends to be a super foggy morning where you can't see in front of you. So the drive over there takes an hour and a half. And the craziest thing is, every time I've hooked one in that area, it's been where a rainbow, like an actual rainbow, ends inside of South Cullen.
Rolled at the bottom of the rainbow.
Exactly. But I still remember that last day. I was like, I wasn't like anxious. I wasn't like on nerves or anything, but I knew I really wanted it. Like, I just needed that fish. And I was pulling Rick around for what must have been like an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we weren't really seeing it. Rick was just basically doing what he always does, throwing 120-foot casts as like a warm up.
Right.
And finally he gives up. He's like, look, Andres, like, clearly I have all the bad luck, so why don't we switch it up? I was like, all right, cool. I get on. All of a sudden, sun starts to come out. We can actually see in these potholes now. And within minutes, a monster trout. And I'm looking at this fish, and I'm like, I had tied these flies. This is before. So I have a fly I call the trout tickler, and I'm on version 6 already. This was version 1. So version 1 was an inverted hook, or the ones that like, or a swim bait hook, or what they used to call it. And it was basically just craft fur with pseudo hair. And I basically I doubled them over, and then I added like some white chenille for the body, big eyes. And basically the fly was like neutrally buoyant, so it would sink like that. And I remember seeing this fish, and I remember like having this like, I guess like directive to fish it like a tarpon. And I did everything the way I do when I did tarpon. So I threw at it. Everything was perfect. Rick basically kind of was agreeing with me on this one. So he goes like, don't move it. And so you could see like it starts to kind of drift in its direction. And this trout kind of like turns up and like looks at it because she was basically inside this pothole, and this perfect bait just starts sinking. And I'll never forget it because she turns a full 180 and faces the boat and doesn't do anything but barely nips
Barely get it.
And I remember feeling all of the possible adrenaline I could have felt in that moment, like all culminate to one move, and it was the world's biggest strip set. And I watched that fly come right out of its mouth. And then I had
I could hear that coming.
Yeah. I had Rick basically behind me saying, like, started yelling at me, like, what are you doing? Like, and I was like, I felt like an amateur. And this giant trout gave me a second shot.
Really?
Moves over into the next spot hole. That's what I was thinking. I was like, this fish wants to be caught. And who am I not to let it be caught?
Right.
And moves over to the next spot hole. I do the exact same cast, drift it over. Fish comes back again, and bigger strip set because I needed that fish, and it didn't work. And that fish leaves. Rick basically says, "Look, that's probably your only shot you're gonna get. Let's pack it up and go home."
Oh man!
But he, like being sarcastic, but like
right.
We ended up fishing like maybe 2 more hours, and we didn't get another real shot at a trout. And I remember going home that day, and I was so mad at myself. I was like, how can I have done that?
Right.
But that's kind of one of the ones that really like stuck out to me or one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much. Because even when you do everything right, there's still a tiny little bit of finesse to make sure you don't just either like tear right through their like soft tissue or actually get them to eat it.
Yeah.
But then again, I haven't done snook as much as you have. And now listening to you talk about it, I'm actually really considering giving the trout a little bit of a break.
You don't have to worry about whether he's in it or not. And yeah, those big trout, they don't get big by being stupid.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I've heard of people finding them actually like way in the back of the ship channel, like where they kind of, but I feel like if I went to the ship channel, most likely, like for me, funny enough, like I think snook are awesome, but my main fish I want to target in the ship channel is actually mangrove snapper.
I love them. We caught some huge ones. I caught the biggest one I've caught was like 17 pounds. And it's a good thing I was using my 12-weight rod. We were fishing for tarpon, and there were some big ones rolling in the very end of the turning basin.
Oh, okay.
And so we were up in there and fishing for them. And we went along that dock, which I always called the steel dock because it had these big spools of steel wire up, or steel. They loaded on ships, but they always had these big giant spools of. So I always called it the steel dock. And we were fishing for tarpon, and I saw this mangrove come up and boom, right on the top. Wow, that was a big mangrove. And then another one did it, and then another one. And pretty soon we could see a school of them, maybe 10 feet down. And so I had my tarpon rod, so I threw it over there, and I hooked one. I swear, I didn't think I was going to get it out of the water. I mean, that thing went down. My rod's bent where it's about like it's going to break. And I'm trying to stop him from getting to the bottom. And right there, fortunately, tugboats would push the big ship in, and then they would pull it out. So when they pulled it out, the props dug. So the bottom undulates.
Okay.
So the one I was on was going to the deeper ones, which was a good thing, because if he'd have got to the bottom, he'd have cut me off on something down there for sure and for certain. So yeah, I got that fish in, and we look at it and go like, this is like a red snapper. Anyway, we caught maybe 4 or 5 more that day, not that big, maybe 7 to 10 pounds.
I mean, that's still really big.
You can't get those things in either. I mean, they're a hard fish to land. And but I love fishing for them. I mean, and they're great to eat. So I love fishing for mangroves.
Yeah, my mom loves eating mangrove snapper, but to be fair, when she got into eating mangrove snapper was when nobody in my family even knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So we were still like hand lining at the pier that we at the place we lived at in PI,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to catch plenty of mangrove snapper, but it was real funny seeing my mom's like Venezuelan culture of, well, we just eat whatever the fuck we catch.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the first fish I ever caught that my mom ate was actually a hard-headed catfish.
Really?
Yep.
I've heard people eat them. I
And
never have. I've always heard that you don't eat those.
Well, you right. That's what you would think. And I mean, I to this day I haven't seen her eat another one, so I don't really remember if it was good or bad. But I remember just making a mental note of it. I remember thinking like, that's the first time I ever heard of anyone doing that. And it's because I had plenty of friends who like fished, but I didn't have like the access to it. I didn't really know what I was doing. But little by little, actually, I got more into the mangrove snapper, just like fishing the actual pier. And like whenever it was like a really big, heavy incoming tide, you'd have like mini grouper kind of like fill up on the seawall, and you could actually catch them on the actually on the fly that you tied, the supreme hair shrimp.
Uh-huh.
And that was actually one of my favorite flies to throw for
That's
them.
my favorite fly at the port.
Yeah.
Secret be known. That's my favorite one at the port. And that was funny. That fly got designed because there was my friend from San Antonio and I were on the jetties fishing for tarpon, and there was just mats of grass going out. And the tarpon were coming up just eating something in that grass, and we could not get one to bite. It just couldn't happen. Finally, I saw a shrimp jump out and land on the top of the mats of grass. I said, Craig, they're eating shrimp, man. And so he says, well, we'll go home tonight. We'll see if we can't come up with something. And so we tied, everybody's tying them swimming backwards.
Mm.
I said, I want to tie one that swims forward like a shrimp, so you could just pull it real slow through the water to look like a shrimp swimming along on the top, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole idea behind it. And so we didn't have any clue. Anyway, he was tying them swimming backwards, and I tied this one swimming forward. I tied a couple of them, and they were very primitive to how my shrimp finally ended up.
Mm.
But we went out the next day, and it was basically the same conditions. And I swear, I caught like 3 tarpon. He never got a bite.
Wow.
That's what it is. They're after these shrimp. So he and I both started working on it. He gave up after a while, and I kept after it. I said, nah, this has got to work. Somehow there's got to be a way to make this fly work. And eventually I came up with like the prototypes of the ones. And just from then on, they just got better and better and better once I figured out how to do it. And
what was your key like breakthrough aha moment on the fly?
It was just like,
you don't have to spill any secrets.
We were tying them with everything kind of hair you could think of. I tied it with supreme hair. That was probably when I realized, whoa, I'm onto something here. Because the epoxy makes it, like transparent, and it gets really smooth. It just worked. I figured out how to tie off the tail so that they actually had a little tail but it was the supreme hair that made me realize this is what you need to use. This is what's going to work. And then it was just developing how much to do it, how to put it in, how to do this, and it just eventually got to where I knew what to do. And I started putting a rattle in them, which really made
I remember the rattle.
Go. I mean, that was like that thing at the port. You just cast that out, let it sink, and pop that thing a couple of times. Just boop, and then let it sink, boop. And man, I mean, wham. So I've caught a lot of tarpon on them. I caught a gar in the Port of Brownsville, about a 5-footer.
Because of the tail? Like, did the teeth get stuck in the tail, or was it just like
no?
hooked?
Actually, that one got hooked.
Oh,
Okay, so I lied earlier. I had hooked a
gar.
and it was so funny. We got it up to the boat, and it was tied with red Supreme hair, and it's lying alongside the boat. And my friend was with me. He says he got out a little pair of scissors and he's going to cut my line. I says, "Hey, I want that fly." And he goes, "Oh, okay, well, let's see." And he gets a little 6-inch pair of hook removers and he's trying to get down. I just started laughing. I said, "Stanley, I'm just kidding. I just couldn't." And he was going to try to get the fly.
That's a good friend.
He's like one of my best friends. He's very, very high up there in my friends.
Awesome.
Anyway, yeah, we've done a lot of fishing together.
See, I was thinking about the fly on the way here. I remember the first time I'd ever seen the fly was actually at Bass Pro's after you had sold it. And I remember I went into your shop like a couple of days later. This is when you still had the shop. And me and my buddy Trey, we would go hang out there because that was like the only thing we really could do. And you were always really open to us just hanging out, which is super badass. And I remember going through one of like the fly boxes you had in the front where you could just buy them. And I remember saying, "Oh, this is that Bass Pro fly, but it has a rattle." And then you looked at me and you were like, no, that's my fly. I made it. And then it all clicked because it was called the Haines Supreme. And I was like, it had gone completely over me for so long. But that was one fly that I had plenty of. And to be fair, I had never thought about it the way that you explained it up until right now. Because I remember thinking, damn, that's a really pretty looking fly, but wouldn't the shrimp be swimming backwards? And I realize now, like the way that you're tying it, I mean, that would work phenomenal even for these bigger trout when they're laid up.
Yeah.
And you don't even need a gurgler for it. So
just make it swim slow. Yeah. I was another thing that made me think about them swimming forward is that's the way they are under the lights when you're fishing for trout. You see a shrimp coming up, he's swimming around.
Yeah.
And he's just swimming around. Make it a fly that you don't have to move very fast, but looks like a shrimp. It's going to fool the fish because it looks real. And it works. I mean, they work. I tied some little bitty ones on some, I guess they were probably 8s. And we went up on the sand flat, and they work great for redfish and everything up there. But we were after the sheephead, and I said, I wonder if I could tie a little bitty one. And I swear, I caught 3 or 4 sheephead that day on a little tiny one.
Yeah. I was really after sheep's head in like the end of 2020 because for some reason I just couldn't do it. And then one day, I had thought back to what this one guide in Florida had told me. His name is Jared Raskob. And basically he told me that if you ever want to win for like basically something like about a bet, but if you ever want to win money from your friends, make them a bet that you can catch a sheep's head on a fly rod and then just tie the ugliest small black fly and they go crazy over it. And I remembered about that at the end of 2020 and I felt like I was the only one who was actually like actually catching sheep's head. Like I could go out to a flat that I knew used to have redfish in the summer, but the water was just not what they wanted right now. And it would be littered with sheephead and I could just have a field day.
Oh, they're fun.
Yeah, they're fun.
Texas permit.
Okay, that's fair. That's the Texas permit for sure. But what blew my mind is you see them spook off so fast and they're so fast. But when you hook them, that tail doesn't really have doesn't have a lot of torque.
The ones I've caught just blasted like a permit. I mean, just there goes 100 yards of line.
Wow.
Yeah, I've never had one that didn't go swim.
Well, maybe I'm just catching small sheep's head.
Well, I don't know. I'm not talking about really big ones, but I've not had one that did just stayed there.
Yeah. I mean, I've also been. It was funny. The other day I was fishing with my friend Ryan Sparrow, and we were catching redfish in really skinny water, and they were all solid fish. They're all 26, 27, like really good fish. And he would hook one, and I had videos where he would hook one and it would get on the reel and take him to the backing. Mm-hmm. And I told him, I was like, well, what are you doing differently? Because I haven't had a fish take me to my backing since like 2015, especially like here. That's like not a tarpon. Mm-hmm. Then I actually watched him. I watched him and I realized, well, he's not really pulling on any fish. And I remember the next fish, I was like, just watch this. And I mean, I learned early on how to really, really pull on fish, because I was practicing for like my couple days I was going to be in Isla Morada. And I was basically using the Andy Mill idea of like putting sand in a bucket, whatever. And like, you know how much your rod can actually like pick up. So, but I remember like thinking to myself that like maybe not a ton of people really like put a lot of pressure, because like they would think that the fly rod's going to break. Granted, I have broken plenty of fly rods.
Oh, I have too.
And some in very silly ways. I remember, just a quick segue. I remember it was one time I was with my buddy Julian in Nicaragua, and we had just landed a mahi-mahi that was like, I think it was like 1.5 pounds under the world record on the fly rod. Everything was for 16. I think it was like 48.7, something like that. Mm-hmm. And like we're basically like we got real lazy, and I mean it's kind of a shame to admit it. We got real lazy. We just threw our flies in the water, and we just kind of held the rods with like
just trolled them.
Yep, just trolled them. And I ended up hooking a bonita. Uh-huh. And as I'm fighting this bonita, a sailfish comes and just annihilates it. Uh-huh. So at this point, my reel is like taking off. Like I remember thinking, okay, like I'm gonna let this go up to like maybe another 100 yards, and I'm gonna really put the heat on it. I don't know which part of me thought I could put any heat on a fish that's like 400 yards away.
Right.
Yeah. And, but the weirdest thing happened. So this fish is going, and one of the mates kind of was like, are you going to do anything? I was like, okay, right. So I cranked the drag down. And when I do that, I don't know if I remember seeing the sailfish come up, but I don't remember seeing the line come up. So the sailfish comes up. I instinctively think the fish is like hooked for good. So I kind of pick the rod up, and all of a sudden you see my rod go bam, 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 bam. And my rod became, my 4-piece rod became like 7 pieces. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know what I did wrong, but I'm pretty sure I was doing a lot of things wrong, because I was just trying to over.
Rods are easy to break.
That's fair.
Yeah, you need to pull with the butt. But anyway, yeah, they're easy to. I've broken several myself.
Yeah. No, I've had everything from like that story to there was one time my mom had just bought me a new TFO rod. It was a 9-weight, and I thought to myself, like, all right, I'm gonna go take this for bass, because we used to live, or well, we still do, but we live right by like a pond. Mm-hmm. So all right, I'm gonna do this. So I go out, and I hooked a tree, and I'm like, oh, this is a 9-weight. I could probably pull this branch off and like show it who's boss, because I'd been fishing with like 6 weights. Mm-hmm. And I tried to put heat on it and broke right in half. It shattered on me, and I was like, okay, all right. But yeah, man. Aside from that, I don't have many other stories of breaking fly rods. But I'm sure there's some. I mean, maybe I'm just not even thinking about them. Mm-hmm. But I'll take this opportunity to do a segue into you and your art, because I think your art's really, really fucking cool.
Thank you.
And I have a couple of your pieces that I've won in a couple tournaments. But personally, I do eventually plan to like buy some of the ones that you're selling whenever I do actually get the chance to. But how did you get into it? And from what I'm looking at in this room, it seems like you have more of a enjoyment like painting blue water stuff.
That's just what's in here. I like to paint anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I got started. Well, I've always been talented, I guess you would say. My 3rd grade teacher told my parents that if he wants to pursue an art degree, don't discourage him. And so, in the summer when we're out of school and stuff, I'd I played football, I played baseball with all my friends and everything, but I always liked to sit and paint a painting or, do some artwork. So I had some oil paints and I painted those. And I just, that's just something I always wanted to do. I got into, in high school, we got a bunch of friends of mine were really into birds and nature. So I thought this was cool. I got binoculars, learned how to identify birds and all this. So I started painting those, and then I went to did some kind of a little art show in high school, and I painted a bird, and I mean, it just like it won, and everybody was just like, "Wow, this is great." So I ran into some other artists that were bird artists, and I got to know some people in the Audubon Society. So I was painting birds basically, and I'm a hunter, so I painted lots of deer and quail and those. But I noticed that niche for the birds. Okay, so anyway, I went after I got out of the Army, got back to here. I went to University of Houston, but I went there as a senior because I'd already had a couple of years in the Valley. I think my first semester at University of Houston, I was a junior, and after that, I was a senior. Well, once you're a senior, you pretty much you can get any class you want. You have pre-selection over everything, so classes don't fill up because you could get in it, and somebody else will get pushed out. Anyway, I was painting some birds up there, and we did a little art show over at one of the little shopping centers my wife and I did, and it was all birds. And I sold a bunch of them, but I met a guy that was worked for the Houston Audubon Society. He says, "You want to do some work for us? We need some work done, and we need an artist to do it. Would you like to do it?" I said, "Of course I would." So I did some illustrations for them. And in the meantime, I met a little gallery owner up there and they were still pretty much into birds. And so I did first show I did for them was a complete sellout. We did a one-man show, and it was a complete sellout. And I thought, this is really cool. But I got to noticing how these guys that are really, really sharp at identifying birds are, picking things out about them, little things.
Okay.
And I thought, you know what? I love painting hawks. And immature hawks, there's so many of them that are very, very similar. All I'm going to do is I'm going to paint these hawks, but I'm going to put them down in the trees where just light is hitting them here and there. There's just spots of light on them to see if they can identify them. And that was so fun because they'd all get in their little huddle. And they'd all take it's got to be this. No, it can't be that one. It's got to be this. And then finally they'd come over, okay, what is it? This is fun, And so I got into light. That's what made me get into light, putting light on things. And then I saw some art in a National Geographic. It was a guy named Stanley Meltzoff, and he painted fish. He painted tarpon and marlin and bonefish. And I'm looking at the light on them, and I'm going, that looks really, really interesting. So I did another bird show, at the same little gallery, and I put two fish in it. I put a marlin and a tarpon. They stole the show. Nobody talked about my birds anymore. They're just like, what have I found here? So I started painting more fish.
Yeah.
And I was pretty much sticking with billfish. And anyway, we moved back to the Valley. And I've always been an avid fisherman. So I thought, I'm going to start painting these redfish and trout and see if they sell. Well, they did. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking around and go, there's very, very few people painting fish right now. I mean, this was back in, I would say, the late 70s. And I'm going, there's nobody really painting fish. So we started doing art shows, and I was selling fish paintings and just about selling out.
Wow.
And I thought, this is really cool. And I like painting because I like the light, and I like the filtering of the light, and I like the, it's exciting because there's so light everywhere, and you can play with it. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's pretty much how I got into painting fish.
Wow. It's interesting. I like what you said. You got into painting light. And recently with my like ventures in cinematography and photography, a lot of what is actually being doing is you like quite literally are also capturing light.
Exactly.
It's a game of the angles and how the light basically builds a theme around your subject. So it's really interesting to think about illustration, especially at such a high level like you're doing, being very similar in regards to the concepts. And that's why you have a lot of your stuff looks like it was taken like with an actual camera, which is, it is like, I'm looking at the water in this back canvas, and it looks like I'm looking at a fish tank. Like it looks insane. That's
experience. That's painting a lot of paintings.
Yeah. Well,
but you get to where you could see what's going on and just work with that. And it's, I really enjoy painting the fish. I still paint ducks and quail and deer and whatever somebody wants. I painted a bunch of Indians for a man one time, and pretty much if you want something and you want to commission me to do it, I can paint it.
No, absolutely, yeah. Okay, well, we got 15 more minutes left. I wanted to ask two questions. The first one is, from all your years experiencing this ecosystem, what is the biggest change that you've seen? It can be positive or negative. It can be amount of fish. It doesn't matter. But something that you were like, I remember when it was like this back then.
Fewer boats.
Okay, yeah.
No, we used to go when my brother and I first discovered the scooters.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little guy down the street making them, and he was a plumber, and they made this little boat, and it had a tunnel in it, and the motor was locked. There was no steering wheel. There was no nothing. To turn a boat, you leaned it.
Oh.
But you could get really skinny water because the prop was actually up in the under the hull, So we decided that we had him make us one, and we're out running around and having fun, and we kept going closer and closer to the island. Just because the water's getting shallower and shallower and shallower, and we're just like, this is fun. Look at the water we're running in, because you couldn't have done that in any other boat.
Mm-hmm.
And we start seeing redfish swimming over, going, what are they doing up here in this shallow water? Well, we stopped the boat out and fished them, and I swear the water was like ankle deep.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody knew that they were there. You'd see boats go by, and they were way, way out there in the bay. They probably never even saw us. And we got thinking, you know what? If you get in trouble out here, you could spend days before somebody would actually find you. There's nobody. And so we started going up there catching redfish all the time. We didn't tell anybody where we're catching them. We go, where are you catching all these fish? Finally, we started telling a few people, well, they're up there in that real shallow water. Of course, they couldn't get there. They didn't have a boat that could get there. So we'd take them on our boat. And anyway, the scooters were getting more and more popular all the time, and they actually had steering in them. Ours didn't have steering, but they got more and more advanced, and people started discovering that. But still, there was very few people up there.
So scooters back then had the prop actually inside where?
Yeah, you couldn't raise or lower the engine or nothing. So you had the engine, you mounted it up high where the prop was probably halfway between the bottom of the boat and probably the bottom of the boat probably divided the prop in half.
Okay.
And they were slow getting going, but once the water got in that tunnel,
so that was like the creation of the tunnel hole.
That's I wasn't in on that. I just knew some people down the street that were making one of those boats. And they said that the reason why the tunnel so you get real shallow. And they were going back in Peyton Bay. Okay. And so anyway, there was a bunch of people about that time that were starting to make these scooters. They were out of plywood, but they all had tunnels in them, and they had one tunnel prop deal where you could pump the engine up a little bit. You could lower it down and pump it up. And then the steering was the greatest thing that happened because, you can lean them and turn them, but you got to be really careful about getting into the dock and without running into stuff. But that was great fishing for me because their fish were up there every day. There was nobody around, just nobody.
Wow.
And it's like your own private fishing hole.
I mean, I bet. Especially when like sometimes whenever we have like the summer not so high water, there's spots where fly anglers can go, and it's like you have like a sort of a haven away from Mr. Mayak running the shoreline, right?
Yeah, yes.
But even then, you still have the guy.
Nowadays, that doesn't happen. They're running the shoreline all the time.
Yeah, they don't care they don't care at all. But it's funny because you also like the little safe havens that some of the fly anglers have. They may get caught fishing it in regards to some shallow sports season, and then the next day you'll have someone waiting in that spot.
Oh, exactly.
And it's like it's kind of brutal. But I also think there's an interesting dynamic to it because especially like me as an angler, I use it as like a motivation to like put myself in spots where they're either not gonna find me, have no way of actually getting there, or just finding new fish or new water instead of new water.
Well, fish swim. So, there can be somebody in there and they might not be there the next day. You just get you go out now and you're heading to a spot you want to start the morning at, and you're getting closer and closer. You go over there and goes, there's already a guy fishing there. So we go off and try fish another one. I mean, they got there first. That's their spot, and they're pulling the boat along. So, what they're doing. And a lot of times, you'll go off fishing somewhere else and come back by and they're gone. And you go, well, let's just go see if there's some fish there, because pulling the boats really don't spook fish. It's the boat running that spooks the fish.
Yeah.
So the guy's poling around, they'll spook a fish off a bank, but he's not spooked like an engine, motor running. He'll come right back. So you could go into a spot that somebody's already fished, and if it's been long enough, they're back there.
Yeah.
So, you have to just get along. I mean, everybody has a right to fish.
Oh, well, yeah.
So, it's better if people have more etiquette than they do.
Well, that's one thing I feel is kind of starting, not lack, but there's definitely more people who don't really know like the rules of the road.
It's inexperience.
Yeah, exactly.
They're told, buy this boat, you're going to get back in the shallow water where the fish are. You drive around and look for them. Well, they don't realize what they're doing to everybody else by driving around looking for fish.
Mm-hmm.
You always have to hope that eventually they'll get it. But at first, it's like a whole new fun thing. They've done something they've never done in their life. They got this really nice boat that runs in really shallow water. And they've been told that you can run around and find fish. And, half the time they go right over. They don't even see them. They don't know what they're looking for.
That's also true.
Everybody has a right to be out there. So the bay belongs to everybody. So you can't really complain that much,
Yeah.
You just kind of wish they stayed a little further away from you or, but.
That's fair.
It's all good.
Yeah. But it's funny because one of the last times I was out with Rick, we were fishing one of the spoils, and a lot of toes, not like a lot, but some of like the whole stepping on people's toes also comes from like new skiffs and stuff who don't understand how it works. Mm-hmm. But weirdly enough, there was one time Rick and I were on a spoil, and we were on the spoil where if I describe it, you'll know where it is. It's the spoil, and if you look at it from the aerial view, it's like there's that big channel that goes straight all the way through, like halfway to like basically like the far west edge.
You're talking about
Like super South Spoils are in South Cullen. And
South Cullen, okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking Peyton. Okay. Oh, yeah, I know exactly where that is.
Yeah. And we see this one shallow sport like 2 miles out, driving right towards us. Whatever, he'll eventually move. 1 mile closer. Okay, any minute now. Gets closer and closer and closer. Probably up to where within like 150 feet or like it blew my mind. We weren't in the middle of these spoil islands. We were on an edge and fishing this edge.
Mm-hmm.
And this boat gets within like a cast and a half. And I look at, like, Rick and I had already fished like all day that day. We were already kind of over it. We'd caught fish. We were happy the way it was, but it was kind of like a really like bitter way to end it. It was like there was just no respect. Was this guy on his phone? It was just like there was so many things.
So I just shot by you.
Yeah, just no. You want to know a bad one? Not a bad one. Kind of funny. Marcus and I, we were fishing inside again. One of the spoils. I don't remember which one. And I don't know who, but a skiff, I think it was a Hell's Bay, but it was a skiff that basically drove right past us by 200 feet, stopped on the same spoil, pulled up into the spoil. We're within earshot. And they throw a couple spin rod casts, look around, don't catch anything. And when they're looking around, we actually end up catching one. And they saw that, they spun up, they left, and it all happened within like 5 minutes. And it was like, where was the etiquette? So I mean, there's both sides. So
yes,
skiffs and shallow sports.
It burns me, but I try to let it pass.
Yeah. You know? I got one more question for you. With all the experience that you have, being able to fish all this water for all these years, what would you tell like the new guides or the new like real aficionados of this sport that we get to share? Mm-hmm. Like, what would you basically get an advice, if you will? Didn't mean to put you on the spot like that, but I feel like you're someone who I'd want to ask.
I'm not following the question quite there.
So basically, like the new generation of fishermen that see the fishery the way that you see it or the way that you and I see it, what would you tell them? Like, what would you advise them to do in regards to either keeping the fishery the same way, trying to make it better, or just you get basically like free control here? You can say whatever you want to say.
Well, I think that they should teach or by example, showing everybody how to fish with other people around, have some etiquette. Also, I'm one that's really a stickler about taking more fish than you should have. We live here. You could go get you a fresh fish anytime you want. You don't have to put them in the freezer. So I'm really against catching fish to freeze. Catch a few fish, take them home and eat them. Go catch some more.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I agree with you 100% on that. Yeah, my mom and I are the same way. I'm normally the one who like enjoys like just letting them go, and it's whenever my mom really wants to have a fish for like ceviche or something that day, or she's having guests, whatever. Okay, yeah, I'll go and keep one or two, and then that way she gets her fresh fish. But most of the time, even she's the one who's like, "No, let's let them go." So,
okay. I like fresh fish, so I go catch one when I want to catch it, when I want to eat it, and like we lived there in Laguna Vista. Molly would say, "Well, I'd sure like to have a flounder." I said, "Well, I'm going into work. I'll just go a little bit early, and I could fish that Highway 100 shoreline, and pretty much always catch a flounder." Mm-hmm. So we would have the flounder sucker, and we wouldn't eat any fish. When I go fishing with a guide or go with anybody, I'll keep a couple of fish, and that's it.
Yeah.
And personally, redfish, the closer to 20 inches they are, the better they are to eat. So I always turn back big fish. I rarely will keep a fish that's 25 or up. I like the 23, 22, 21 inch redfish to eat. And trout are okay. I'm not real fond of trout, so I don't really keep any. I'll keep some if I'm fishing with some people that they want trout. But I love flounder. I love redfish, and I do eat snook, and I eat mangrel snapper. That's basically the fish that I eat. And I'll just go catch the one fish. I don't freeze anything. There's no frozen fish in my house.
Wow. Okay.
So, I think if people adopted that approach, I think it would
be in a better spot.
Definitely help the bay. Yeah, these guys that want to fill their ice chest, if they're from out of town and they want to have fish full, they come down once or twice a year.
Yeah.
But if you live here, you don't need to do that.
Okay. Well, again, Larry, it's an honor to be able to actually do this with you. Not gonna lie. I mean, it seems like your dogs want you to get off already. No, I get you. Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Cool.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks.